Welcome to No One Tells You This. I'm Laura Massetti. I'm beyond excited for this discussion today with Dr. Dieter Veldsman. He is the Chief HR Scientist at AIHR, which is a title that I didn't even know existed. So we will explore that, a global HR academy serving over 75,000 professionals across 180 countries. He has spoken at over 150 conferences, published over 80 articles, and co authored a book called Work for Humans, which is an absolutely interesting topic in the wake of AI. So I'm looking forward to exploring all of that with you today. But Dieter, before we get into anything else, please introduce yourself, your journey, how you got here, and all that good stuff.
No, perfect, Laura, and hello to everyone. It's fantastic to be here and looking forward to the conversation. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Dieter Veldsman. So I've always been interested in human behavior, and I really think that that's where my journey started. So I started as a organizational psychologist, and from there wanting to understand how do humans operate and function in large organizations. And that kind of set the tone for my journey first in more of the organizational development, organizational design space. And from there, I've always tried to follow where interesting work has taken me. And that's taken me along paths of running a technology company, having a consulting business, working in mergers and acquisitions, building employee engagement technology platforms. I was the chief HR officer for a multinational insurance business at some point in time. And where I am now is as the chief HR scientist at AIHR, where I lead basically three things. The one is all our applied research work that we do with our clients. And we try to answer the question on where is HR going and what are the challenges we need to solve for. The second piece there is then strategic advisory work with them around how do we solve these challenges in an evidence-based manner. And then lastly, the fun stuff, I must say, is the content development side of things. How do we translate that into things that people can utilize practically and consume, like courses, other types of content, articles, etc. On the other side, I'm also a bit of a closet academic, so I'm a professor of practice at the University of Johannesburg. I've always been involved in some way or form in human development research, whether that is in employee engagement, employee experience, and try to bring those two things together to say, how do we make research real in the real world so that real people can solve real problems? That's kind of me in a nutshell.
It's amazing. And you have such a diverse, interesting background, but definitely all focused on all things HR. I think you've definitely captured every box you can check within the HR sphere, that's for sure. So tell me a little bit more on what you're focused on right now around AI specifically, because you see so much out there, positive and negative on AI, how it affects people, how we can use it to our advantage. So what's your stance on it right now?
Yes, I think it's definitely, I think if you speak to anyone at the moment for longer than a minute or two, or you open up wherever you get your news feed from, I think AI pops up as the overarching topic. And I think it's fair that it does that, right? So my personal view is I think that AI has a lot of potential. However, we do need to know and be responsible around how are we actually going to incorporate AI into work in the future, and what is that going to mean for some decisions that we need to take pertaining to how work will be augmented between human beings. AI in future. So I think it's a massive opportunity, but the real question for me is twofold. The one is AI is going to change the workforce. We know that AI is going to become part of the workforce, part and parcel. I think it's a really positive thing when we start thinking about designing meaningful work for people where the human contribution is really, really significant. But on the other side, there's also still a lot of uncertainty and fear about that. And I think that is a narrative, especially when we start talking about things like early stage careers and entry level roles, etc., that I think is top of mind and we should discuss a lot more, because just because AI can does not mean it should. And I think that's some of the key things. So wearing my HR hat for a moment, we are very interested at the moment on how AI is transforming organizations, how that will change the work that we do, which will lead towards new type of operating models, new jobs, new tasks, new skills that's going to be required. And then what is the role that HR can play to guide the organization, but also change itself to be able to get there. So I think it's a good news story, but it is one of uncertainty and progress and traction and change. And I think that's what a lot of people get caught up in at the moment.
Yeah. No, it's from my vantage point. So, I'm focused on the early
Mm,
professional side of it. And I think it's more of comes from a place of fear, a lot of it,
Of
right? But
course.
if you take a step back, it's just that we need to refocus on how we get people there, how we think about work differently. It's an amazing time where so many things are coming together, but we all have a part in figuring it out.
Mm.
What I really love that AIHR is doing, so I've been on your platform, and tell me a little bit more on how your company is actually helping the HR professionals themselves, because I think that's a great use of putting AI to work in a really
Mm.
exponentially positive way.
Yeah. So we do a couple of things. I think one of the key things was to try to understand what does AI fluency actually look like for HR professionals. So I think everywhere you look, people are going to tell you you need AI skills, but the real question is what does that actually mean for an HR professional? What are the things that we need to be able to do? It doesn't mean everyone needs to become an AI engineer or data scientist for the future. So we've actually built out our competency and our skills taxonomies to incorporate AI fluency. We've developed some courses and content for HR professionals to be able to kind of build competence and confidence in AI fluency. And then we try to make it practical to say, these are the use cases we should be focusing on. This is the role that we are going to play in HR ourselves, but also in the business. And then we've developed a couple of frameworks and methodologies that HR professionals can follow to have the right conversations with the business and talk about things like what does AI readiness really look like? It's a culture transformation that our business is going through. So we try to look at it from a systemic and a holistic point of view. So how does HR help the bigger organization? How does it help leaders and managers guide this change? But also then how does it build and enable itself to move into the future? And we believe and we hope and we trust that that will also inform then some of the bigger societal questions that we do think we need to ask. And we do think HR needs to be involved in, which is the ones that you've mentioned, right? In terms of what will employment look like? What will work look like? What are early careers going to look like? Now, how do we think about things like infrastructure in the future to make sure that AI brings people together and does not necessarily push us further apart around who's got access and who hasn't? But we try to play our little role in the universe within which we operate, which is the HR professional, to equip and enable them to be part of this transformation.
What I think is especially important in the HR world, I mean, it says it in the title, human, right? Is the human element. And I think there is this fear that, AI has a negative play on all of that. And again, we have a lot to figure out. But where does that really allow for HR professionals to now lean into the human side of their role, which I feel like everyone went to university and grew their career to do? And
Yeah.
they haven't, right? They've been focused on policies and procedures and all of the ugly stuff. But
Mm.
share more on that.
Yeah, I think there's a big thing, right, where, and we first need to, and there's a very false narrative out there, right, that says transactional HR work is not valuable and strategic HR work is better. The reality is in HR, you will always have some transactional work. It's part and parcel of the contribution that the function makes. I think if we are clever, we can actually now utilize technology that is smart enough, read AI, to take away a lot of that in the right way. So ever since the 1990s, we've been talking about HR wanting to be strategic business partner, focusing on the high touch moments, focusing on a lot of the things that you've mentioned. But in reality, if your transactional side of things are not working, in an organization, nobody wants to talk to me about talent management if I can't pay my people properly. Nobody wants to talk to me about how do we develop leaders and learning and development if I'm not able to put my basic benefits policies in place. So I think what AI will definitely do, and the data is also confirming that we collect and that we are starting to see, is AI will definitely take away some of the transactional work, which we think is a good thing. We think the question we should be asking ourselves there is not what AI will replace, but what does HR professionals do with the time they get back? And then we also think it'll augment a lot of other things. So think about this practically. If I'm a HR business partner, I've always been very reliant on other sources of information to be able to provide the guidance to my business. How can we actually build AI in such a way that it equips and enables the HR business partner to have a better strategic conversation in the moment with their stakeholder? Something AI can't do that I think HR really contributes is contextual intelligence, right? So why does this matter now for us in this type of way? And I think HR's role is starting to shift a lot more towards that. That's definitely the ambition. But I do think then to your earlier point, we need to be open around the fact, and I get this question to be blunt a lot, will I have a job as an HR professional, in the age of AI? You will definitely have one. However, it's going to look very different different than what it looks today. So we need to be open to rescope what that is going to look like. And I think it's a positive thing that it can take away some of the tasks and activities. Also, to be fair, there will be tasks and activities that we want to keep human, even though AI can do them. And I'll use a practical example here. As an organization in Singapore, they said, why don't we use AI to actually have more objective performance management discussions? We take the manager out of it. They're subjective, they're biased. Use AI to give data, evidence-based feedback to the employee. Feedback that they got, employees say, fundamentally performance management is a human moment between a manager and an employee. They don't want to hear from AI what they're doing well or what they're not doing well. They want to feel understood by somebody else that can guide and coach them. So they rolled that back and said, how can we rather use AI to actually enhance the process? Help prepare the manager for the discussion, make sure that they look at all the data over the period, get the employee to practice with an AI role play so that they can give better feedback. So I think it was utilized there to complement a human moment in an existing process, but take away some of the things that the HR professional in the past would have been running around to prepare the report, getting the data, prepping the manager. And I think that shifted and changed. So I think that's what's going to change. We need to think about what do we take away, what do we augment, what do we keep, and what is really going to be valuable in the future. And I think that's a lot of the critical thinking work, the human judgment work, the contextual work, the application work. And I think that's where a massive contribution for HR will lie.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think all of those human skills that maybe some people don't have naturally, like making
Mm,
good judgments in the workplace, all of the soft skills of how to professionally hold yourself, have a conversation with your peers, how to give feedback, how to receive feedback. All
mm.
of that's more important now than ever, right? Because
Yeah.
that's to your point, that's the stuff that AI can't replace.
Yeah, and I think the things that AI can really contribute is very much around the fact that technical knowledge will now be accessible for everyone, right? So I can't code, but all of a sudden through a lot of the AI tools, I can code at an okay level, to be able to do what I need to. But to your point,
Right.
it's those durable skills that will make the difference. And how do we make sure that we keep on developing people in those different elements there? Because I'm with you. I think those are the things that's the glue that holds a lot of things together, that moves things forward. I always smile whenever I work with leaders and I ask, what does a good leader look like? They list all these things that AI cannot do, right? They set a good vision, they
Yeah.
inspire others, they really listen to us, they can manage conflict, they make sense of complexity. Those are the types of things that I think the human contribution towards the work is going to become more and more important.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that perspective. I want to switch gears for a
Mm,
second, because one of the reasons why I was so interested in speaking to you is because you have a lot out there. Firstly, you're great online. I mentioned this to you before, but you know, on LinkedIn, you put
thank you.
so much valuable content out there and it's super engaging. But the one piece that really struck me was your conversations around this undefined behavior. And I
Mm,
think that is completely essential to the surface is all this undefined behavior that happens within the workplace, happens without life, and we make choices and judgments and decisions around it. So I
mm.
know that your PhD was titled Defining Undefined Behavior. And your core argument was that culture is not an atmosphere. So I want you to go a little bit more on culture and
Mm.
what your PhD was about. Tell us more on that.
So I think when you think about culture, right, for me, the simplest definition still remains it's this thing that we celebrate and the things that we tolerate within an organization. And culture is a systemic concept, which means that there's a whole bunch of other things that contribute towards the outcome of a type of culture that we want. Now, let's take toxic cultures aside for a moment. If we think about culture, there are cultures that are better fit and they give you different things in an organization. And culture is one of those things, if you don't shape and define it yourself, it will shape and define without you actually intentionally steering and guiding it a lot more. So I phrase that because I think culture has become a very big buzzword, but people don't really know. When I ask them, how do you do culture work? They have all these culture initiatives and programs. And they say, oh, but it's about values. And other people say it's about habits and others say it's about rhythms, etc. The argument that I make is culture needs to be shaped intentionally. And the argument I make is if you want to shape a culture, there's a systemic approach that you need to take around what are the behaviors that you reinforce in the organization. Are those behaviors the right ones that actually give you the outcomes and the outputs that they want? And do they align to the type of business that you want to be? Does that actually speak to the value system that you put within the business and in the organization? And then how do you infiltrate that into the day to day? Because that's actually where culture gets shaped over time. It's in that interactions with managers knowing what decision to make that's more aligned to our culture. It's in the habits we put in, it's in the rhythms that we put into the organization, it's in the stories that we tell, and it's into the beliefs that we actually establish over time. So I think where we are today is culture will become more and more important, not only in the sense of leading to performing organizations, but I also think being authentic around what is and who you are as an organization. So we recently wrote a book on organizational identity, and identity is almost the underpinning DNA that sits below things like culture and strategy and perception and brand. And I think in the age that we are living in with AI and disruption, I think organizational identity is going to become so important around who you are, what you do. Is that true? Is that authentic? And does that kind of hold up when you look yourself in the mirror? And can people identify and resonate with you? Because ultimately, I think we are going to move into a market of talent scarcity. We're already starting to see that in some parts of the world. And people will have choice. If you are critical skilled, where do you want to work and why do you want to work there? And we definitely see that with some of the younger generations, much more important to be able to buy into who the organization says it is, but are they also actually living that out? And if they're not, how do we take them on, in the public domain via social media, etc. So I think when
Hmm.
you think about culture, my PhD focused a little bit more on the employee engagement side of things, but that feeds into the fact that culture and employee engagement is quite tightly connected to kind of interplay with each other a lot more. But I think culture is such an important thing for organizations to intentionally do work that achieves the culture outcome that you want. And to your point, that's about how do you surface behaviors, how do you intentionally choose certain behaviors, and how do you create that discipline and habits and rhythms that brings them through in the everyday type of work.
So, as an HR leader,
Mm.
how do you make a decision with someone coming into the workplace, a new potential hire, if they're a good cultural fit for the organization?
So personally, I have a bit of a challenge with the whole culture fit idea.
Mm.
So what I rather believe is I think you should think about it as a culture add. You shouldn't ask the question around, does this person fit perfectly with the culture I have? You should rather ask the question, can they add something unique and valuable to the culture to continue shaping it? And the reason I say that, you will have conflicting cultures where somebody just does not fit with the type of way we do things. That is pretty obvious that you will pick up during the course of the talent acquisition process. But I try to rather, instead of trying to put people into boxes and say you need to do these three things, I would much rather say, is there a values fit? Values fit is important. Do we believe that the same things are important? Do you see yourself within the organization, and can you get behind what we are doing and the difference and the contribution that we are making? Are we a place where you see yourself belonging in the organization? Because ultimately, it's first a cognitive choice I need to make. I need to choose I want to be in this organization or not. But I like the idea of values fit and culture add a little bit more, because I think they do interplay with each other in a slightly different way. Of course, there are great like measurement tools out there that can just give you some insight and more self-awareness to help both the individual joining as well as the organization to make the right decision about these types of things. But I think it should also boil down a little bit towards, do we actually know what we are looking for? Do we know who we are from a culture point of view? And can people identify that with us and then associate with us and make that call?
Yeah, that's important. And it's how you're doing it internally and then externally as well, because you're looking to attract the talent, right? But how do you have your cultural values come across in everything that you do? So you're
Mm.
not wasting your time bringing forward the wrong people that just aren't a fit.
Yeah. And it's also okay, right? I think there's a misconception around the fact that you need to be everything for everybody as an organization. And I don't agree with that. I think you need to be clear on, we are an organization where these type of people do really well, that has these values, ambitions, drive, etc. And then I think when you tell that authentic story, the type of talent that you attract is the type of talent that wants to be in your organization, that can actually stay there and make a good difference. We still have a massive disconnect in the employer branding and EVP space around how we portray ourselves outside as an organization. When people join internally, they're like, but hang on, that's not It's not really what was sold to me as part of that. And to be very honest, that's just a waste of time. I think we should be much more open and transparent and help people to make the informed decision about what am I going to get here. There's some companies that do it well. And I'll use a practical example, right? Some companies say, we work really hard. We work very long hours, but you get amazing experience. You get exposure that you won't get anywhere else. But if you choose to say yes for us, this is what work is going to look like for you. And then we have other companies that say, these things are important for us around the communities that we are in. So working hours, for example, flexibility, those types of things, allowing you to volunteer to do more. And then they live that out. And it's two very different decisions that attracts very different type of talent into your organization. But do you know who you really are? And what are the three things that makes you famous? When I work with companies around employer brand, employee value proposition, we say there's a little triangle you need to be aware of. Employer brand, what is the story I tell externally about who I am and how do people see me? There's the employee value proposition. Can I actually back that up with the things that I offer? And there's the employee experience component. How does that translate into the day-to-day way that people and employees experience our organization? And those three things need to be congruent across the board. Otherwise, you actually break the trust in the employer-employee relationship.
Find the third point probably the most difficult
Mm-hmm.
for
Experience.
folks. Yeah.
Agree. Because I think the other two are a little bit more tangible, right? If you think about the lived experience, I always talk, a lot of people talk about the fact that what are the moments that matter in your employee life cycle, in your employee experience, because I believe that is where we get back to our earlier point, culture is built. It's not built in the big town hall presentations. It's built in the difficult conversations that a manager and an employee needs to have. It's built in the experience we provide for you when you are onboarding. It's built in the experience when you think about succession. It's built where people have to engage with team members and the environment and the workplace that we actually build. So I think employee experience is a domain and a field that's starting to come to the fore a lot more. My personal view, it is something HR contributes to, but it is something that's owned collectively by a whole bunch of other stakeholders within the organization that also plays into that. But it is there to understand what does the experience look like and crafting and shaping it intentionally around the key moments that matter in your employee life cycle.
Very interesting. I come from a sales background,
Mm,
and a lot of the mentality on sales is related to your revenue goals, getting things done, really no matter what, right? So, with that sort of, I think, tougher mentality in terms of
yeah.
approach of going about your day and what you're responsible for, how, as an HR organization or department, do you work to bring other departments on board that just have different priorities and mindsets and say, listen, that whole culture thing, that doesn't apply here, right? So how do you work with those kind of organizations and groups?
So I think there's a couple of things, right? So you need to help people understand how it plays out practically. So for example, what I would do is I would say, what pain are you experiencing? And most people will say, let's take your sales example. Yeah, my people are not motivated and they don't know where we are going. I felt we don't have the energy anymore. We used to have a lot more fun in our sales team, but everybody's just head down. It's all targets. Nobody feels like they are performing. And if you tell me that is the pain that you're experiencing, I can tell you that you haven't shaped your culture, you haven't put the enabling mechanisms in place, and you have not really put it in such a way that it supports the people to do what they need to build the type of culture that you want. It doesn't help you go out and you try to explain to people there are 7 culture frameworks out there and research tells us that culture does this. Talk to what the pain is that they're experiencing and help them see how culture can become part of the solution going forward. And then make it practical to say, okay, what are the 3 things that we can do differently to start getting in your environment these things to start and work? I must say that I think sometimes there is still a misconception that people don't know these things matter. I think when you start going into the domain of things like culture, everybody has been in a culture that they did not like. So very often I would ask a manager, what didn't you like about a previous place of employment, or what don't you like about the current culture? And then the question becomes a lot more around, but why is it here and how can we shape it and fix it to be different for future? And I think as an HR professional, you need to learn that is your in. A big thing whenever we talk about HR speaking the business language, it's not about speaking about commercials and financials, etc. It's actually about translating the contribution we can make into the pain points and the solutions that businesses are looking for and leaders are looking for. So if I work in sales, I will go out and say, okay, how would you like your sales function to operate? And they'll tell things like, focused, targeted, fun, incentive driven, high achievement, striving for more. Now, those are characteristics of a type of culture that we can build. So how do we then sit down and say, okay, you need certain rhythms in place, certain routines, certain ways to reward people. You need certain ways that job design is going to work there. And as a leader and a manager, there's going to be certain behaviors that you need to role model for that to become the way that people think about this particular function. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. It's okay in organizations to have a whole bunch of subcultures. A sales team is going to look very different than a product development team. But what are the underpinning principles that binds them together so that there's still coherence in the broader organization? And I think those are the things that you need to talk to kind of your senior executive leadership about a lot more.
I wish that I had you as my HR whisperer for many points when even growing my own organizations where
Mm-hmm.
it's you kind of just get so bogged down into what you need to get done. And then you go
Yeah.
back and you're like, why aren't my people being efficient? Why aren't they being
Yeah.
mentally present? And I just think you need that reminder of it's a constant iterative circle of
Yeah.
you reassessing what your culture is, what are your values, and how as you as a leader are instilling that in your
Mm.
people. So it's super interesting. I want to talk about you for a second because you have had such an interesting background. You're originally from South Africa. You went for your PhD and, also interesting in my lens right now, there's this push of maybe university's not needed, right? So tell me a little bit more on some of your professional decision making that you've
Mm.
that you've made throughout your career.
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned earlier, I've always been driven by a couple of things, right? So for me, my career decisions have all been based on, is it challenging work? Do I find the work content interesting? Is it in an environment where I want to be? So whether that's an organization or country or location. And then the other one is, can I see the impact of what I'm doing? And those are personal value drivers for me that's informed a lot of my career decisions. I think I've been privileged that my career has played out kind of following those principles and helping me make certain decisions in when opportunities have kind of come around. But on the other side, I've also been a firm believer on how do you go and craft the career that you want. So very often those things don't exist. You need to open them up, or you need to go help people understand what that opportunity looks like, that you can step into that over time. And that for me has been, I think, a real interesting insight in my career, at least around don't allow other people to manage your career for you. If you really want to invest in your career, invest in the type of career that you want, and then work with what's happening in the external environment to make that happen. So those things I think have guided me. I am also deep at heart an absolute nerd. I'm extremely curious about the world. So that's kind of what drove a lot of my more formalized studies and research and things like that. But as I said earlier, I believe those things need to help and work in the real world, which is why I see myself as a practitioner scientist. So kind of combining the real world with what the evidence and the data tells us, but bringing it back to say, how do we use this practically? And I've always tried to be in environments where I could blend those two things a little bit more.
Love that. I love that. And I love the true science and the human are co HR and science are they feel a little contradictory, but you're right. I mean, they kind of they feed each other and it makes the perfect pair for sure. So
Yeah.
tell me more about your international experience as well. I want to hear about that and how that shaped some of your view on HR.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I started my career in South Africa. I got into consulting at some point in time because I wanted to travel more and I wanted to see more parts of the world. So I was very privileged to do a lot of work across Africa in various different African countries, a lot of European countries, US. I've done a lot of work in Asia as well. And then about 5 years ago, I made the call to say, I've always been a visitor to a lot of these places, moving through or staying for short periods of time, but I also want to immerse myself a little bit more in a different culture, which then also led towards my move towards the Netherlands, where I've been based for the last 5 years or so. If I can give advice to anybody in their career, I think international exposure is an absolute must. I think it's something that you get such a different point of view. Doesn't mean you need to move to another country, but I think working with colleagues from around the world, seeing that your belief system is not the only one out there, and I think also starting to understand and realize that things is not right or wrong, but they are different. People think about things in a very different way. I think you would have seen the same kind of with you also kind of living on two different continents. So that's been something that's really driven me, to say, and I find people, as I've mentioned, behavior fascinating and interesting. So it's great to combine that with a different cultural context in a different location or in a different country.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think everyone should have an international flavor to their job. And that could look like flying all over the world, which
Mm.
has its positives and negatives, or it could be being open to and working with other teams internally. But it's necessary, right? Because diversity is key in building out great teams as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all the research tells us that diverse teams perform better because you have better ideas that come to the table that is challenged and shaped over time. Whereas if it's the same homogenous team, you find the same type of thinking that then doesn't really challenge and enhance. And I just think from a being a better human point of view, it's good to work with people that don't look like you, think like you, see the world through your lens, doesn't have the same context that you have. I think that also grows you as a human being over time in terms of your own worldviews and your perspectives on, on life and all the things you need
Yeah.
to talk about with an open bottle of red wine, those types of things.
Exactly, exactly. And I live in Italy and I get it. And I know you're coming here soon, so I know you get it too. But
Eh,
sometimes that's necessary.
Spot
So
on.
I want to move into a little bit of a rapid fire game
Mm,
that I
go for it.
have for you. Okay. So it's quick responses, gut feel, just go with it. Okay. One skill that AI will never replace:
Critical thinking.
experience or potential.
Oh, that's a difficult one. I believe experience breeds potential.
Okay. One behavior that gets noticed immediately by great managers.
Communication skills, the ability to communicate clearly in a contextually relevant way.
Biggest mistake that people make within their first 90 days.
They try to be everything for everyone and they commit to things without really understanding the context.
Final one. One question every employee should ask their manager.
What do you expect of me and what does good look like?
Good, good. Pretty good. That was like very quick on the
It's a lot
spot.
of fun.
Usually there's a lag in it, but you did awesome. So good, super inspiring. Now, how we typically end every
Mm.
podcast is taking a look to say, looking back on your career, your journey, what you've built, who you worked with. What's one thing that nobody told you at the beginning, but once you found out about it, it's changed everything for you?
I think that nobody told me at the beginning how intentional you need to be about the things that you want. I think that I entered the workplace with maybe a bit of a naive, idealistic idea, that organizations help you build out certain things, etc. But I think nobody told me about the intentionality that you have, but also the amount of power and influence you actually carry to make decisions around what career you want. And once I realized that, it definitely changed my perspective and my view. Maybe aligned to that a little bit more maybe this seems a little bit far out, but anything really is possible. But for you to dream big, you need to see different things because you can only dream as big as what you think reality is going to look like. And that's why I'm a big fan of exposure, international connections, those types of things, etc. And I've tried to kind of infuse that a little bit more into my own career. And once I realized that it's those things and that it's up to me, I think it changed my way that I looked at my career in a very different way.
Amazing advice. Amazing advice. Thank you so much. So, Dieter, tell me, where can folks reach out to you, learn more about you, everything you published, whatnot?
So happy to connect on LinkedIn. So just send me a note or send me a message or follow me there. I also share quite a lot of work that we are doing in the HR space, try to share some practical components there as well, but I'm quite active. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also then listen to my podcast, the HR Dialogues, where I talk specifically about HR topics and how that's changing in the world of work. And you can find that in all the normal podcast places.
Amazing. Well, I'll include everything in the show notes. Dieter, thank you so, so much. You are absolutely fantastic. And I do believe that you, AIHR, are really changing the world, especially around AI and for businesses. So
Thank you
thank
so
you so
much for
much.
having me. Loved having the conversation with you, Laura. And I hope we chat again soon.
Such a pleasure. Thanks.
Bye bye.